Derek,
JB,
lovely to see you.
lovely to see you as ever.
And indeed, welcome now to part 3 of JB Meets DB.
Time flies.
Further philosophical explorations of the power to mind and the mastery of PowerPoint. And of course, here we have our Zen master of PowerPoint, indeed, Derek Borthwick, aka DB. Derek, again, I'm going to ask you some questions.
Okay, fair enough.
My chance to ask those. Let's start with, what is the purpose of a PowerPoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a great question and one that often isn't addressed because we're not talking here about death by PowerPoint. The way I see it is the PowerPoint has 3 main type of attendees. There's those that want to be at the presentation, the idea to get some information from the presentation, some learning. There's those that have to be at the PowerPoint presentation, a 3-line whip, and then there's those that need to be at the presentation for some sort of self-certification or certification process or continual professional development needs.
And I can certainly feel the winds of change coming in as we speak.
So can I.
And with it, what are the major mistakes that PowerPoint presenters make when it comes to content?
I think the major mistakes they have in content.
Hello, puppy.
There's a great with the top. We all seem to have visitors, don't we?
We do. We do.
The great mistakes when we look at content is, if you have a look at a slide, JB, this constantly puzzles me. It's not a competition to see how much information you can get on a slide.
It's not.
No,
Oh.
and it's certainly not a competition to see who can use the smallest fonts. And it's not a competition to confuse 20% of males who are colourblind by using colours that they can't differentiate. So these are the common mistakes I see on the content. And when we actually look at the makeup of the slides as well, the common mistakes in the actual preparation of the content, that then takes us down a whole new avenue as well. And in order to understand that, we've got to really understand, how does the brain actually work? How do we process information? So if I was to put up a slide, JB, and it was a PowerPoint slide, and I put 5 balls on that slide, and I asked you to count them, that would take you an average about 0.2 of a second. If I was
I hope.
Oh, I hope. Maybe I should build in allowances.
Thanks very much.
The way I talk in averages. If we are looking at 7 balls there, that figure rises up to 1.2 seconds. And if I was to put 10 balls up, that figure rises to 2 seconds. So that's a 500% increase, JB. And yet, what are we doing? We're going against the working of the brain by putting as much content on as possible. What other mistakes do I see? I also see the mistakes where we are naturally drawn to bright objects and bright colours. So while somebody has a very bright background on a PowerPoint presentation, it means, surprise, surprise, the audience aren't looking at you. I also see we are naturally attracted to large objects. Those are the first objects we see, so we see big signs. And what do? We put the heading, which is of least importance on the slide, in the biggest letters, and the key points in the smallest text. Now, I could go on, but that gives you some ideas of some of the mistakes that I see on the content.
So from a content point of view, I think that makes absolute sense. But of course, that's not the only mistakes. It almost takes 2 to tango when it comes to PowerPoint. There is content, but there is also delivery.
There is delivery, yeah.
And what are the major mistakes in that delivery?
Yeah, I think the cardinal sin number 1, this is the biggest sin, is when you put a PowerPoint presentation up and the person starts reading from the presentation. As soon as you start reading from the presentation and the audience are reading, you have lost them. Now, when we look at the short-term memory, JB, as well, 90% of what you hear, you will have forgotten about within 30 seconds. That's why when you go on you're running for your train and you want to find your ticket and you keep going, right, where is it? You find your ticket, you go, great, and then you put it back in, where did I put it, and check it, and you check it on average about 6 times. Now, this is crazy because you should actually remember. You're laughing, but we all do this.
I'm laughing also because my wife would say it's probably about 100% in my case. So I forget everything, particularly everything that she tells me within the first 5 minutes. So there we go.
Yeah, so these are the things that are going on. And when we look at delivery, the other thing I see is a lack of movement. Now, the eye is naturally attracted to movement. That's what happens. Our amygdala is tripped in the brain when we see movement. We have to process this. I see people who are very, very static, who are not moving around. They're not using their voice properly, they're not using any intonation, and they're not bringing to life the slides. It's not about presenting the slides one by one and reading them. It's about bringing them to life. If you don't do that, you know what it's like, JB, when you see somebody's holiday snaps. I've shown you my holiday snaps, and you know, 1 or 2 is interesting, but by the time you get to 10, it gets a bit heavy going.
I never knew you had so many different colours of Speedos. But there we go.
That's conjuring up a very unfortunate image. But yeah, this is what we do on PowerPoint presentations. And the other thing with delivering this is we should, in essence, have one message per slide. You can have lots of slides, but just have one message per slide and use pictures as well, not just text.
Fantastic. And then, of course, you've had the pleasure and perhaps displeasure of seeing many, many presentations over the years.
I have, yeah.
What was the standout? What was one of the best presentations you've seen?
Do you know, it's hard to actually look back and think of one, particularly in the investment management industry, that has stood out. There was one where there was a link to James Bond in presenting fixed income, which was good. That used a lot of interesting techniques. Some great presentations I saw was when I was recently at a presentation out with the industry where it was marketing guys that were presenting, and that was a proper use of delivery, proper use of PowerPoint. The way it was delivered with using images, it was well put together. There was very little text. The key points were in larger text. It was an absolute, showcase in how to use PowerPoint.
I think an amazing standout one for me was Dr. Hans Rosling, who used to be one of the UN academics. And unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he had the most amazing ability to time to his slide. He would have this little pointer with a little yellow pointy finger at the end of it, and just as he would point to the screen, the presentation would animate and change with it. It was amazing to watch, and it's a shame he's no longer with us.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress.
We digress, yeah.
On that then point of differentiation, one, how can people differentiate themselves in a presentation, and how can we bring power to mind into that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, JB. And I think you've got to be constantly doing something called pattern interrupt, because as we sit there and people come into the PowerPoint presentation, there is a lot of, I've seen and done this before and I've heard it all before, and their BS detector is pretty high. So in order to keep people uptime, so they're not drifting inside and thinking about the holidays and where they have to go at the weekend and perhaps meeting friends and restaurant bookings, etc., you have to make sure that it's interesting enough to do that. So one of the key things you have to do is actually do this form of pattern interrupt to actually make sure people stay in uptime. So one of the easiest things you can do is actually not to use PowerPoint. You can actually, there's little tricks you can use where you can press buttons on the keyboard and the screen will completely disappear. And what you'll find as soon as you do that, everybody's attention will draw to you as the speaker. And it's interesting, I go to Toastmasters International, and there is no PowerPoint, and it's great. It's like going back to the old days, JB. You probably remember the old acetates on the screen.
Yes, indeed, yes.
But it's like going back to the old days.
Just.
Before PowerPoint, where you actually have to rely on creating visual pictures and stories with the use of your voice and your language. And that is one of the ways that you can differentiate yourself.
That's fantastic, Derek. It's great to hear more about Power to Mind. Great to hear it in the context to PowerPoint presentations. And that concludes part 3 of JB Meets DB. And if you like what you're hearing, give us the thumbs up. Please send us an umbrella, because it's now starting to rain. And please send your comments so we can start to inform future ideas and topics that we can cover. For now, it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from him. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks for watching.